Thank you very much. Rachel, first, you talked about communities this morning as the new institutions, the new institutions who actually host distributed power in the future. Now we heard an account more of communities as sometimes supporting big corporations or being actually devoid of the power of acting through labor or ownership. Do you think that community is just a transitional moment, a transformation, matter of transformation, or community have actually act in a political or another way to take conscience of themselves and to build themselves up actually power communities?
Sorry, I'm being very British and drinking tea on stage, but I think it actually comes back to some of the structural questions that we've been talking about, that when pyramids sit on the top of communities and it's not really a connected community, it's kind of a community with an institution controlling it, you quickly move from a model of empowerment to exploitation. And that line is very thin. And it's my worry not when just institutions sit or big companies sit on the top of communities, so Amazon with Mechanical Turk, but how we even prevent some of sort of the micro labor communities such as TaskRabbit actually getting into the area of exploitation and not empowerment. So I think it's a really important question to raise, because you can make the natural assumption that distributed communities are better than hierarchical institutions. But distributed communities are not better than hierarchical institutions if they don't solve many of the inequalities and power struggles that pyramid institutions can also create. So getting the DNA, figuring out this tension between the center and the network is a really, really tricky question.
So, my worry is basically in relation, also in response to your talk this morning, is that my worry is about this vision of the future that so many economists right now share, including your very own Piketty, right? That you create basically a sort of, you wipe out the middle class, right? So, and you have the super class that I mentioned and these like super low paid workers. And how do you do this, right? With interfaces like Mechanical Turk, but also by de-skilling workers. And how do you do that? By destroying education. And how do you destroy education? In my opinion, through things like Coursera. So where basically people are clearly less educated, education goes down the hill, and what you have is basically elite institutions that will produce fantastically skilled and educated people, and then you have the masses that are educated online. This is a little overgeneralized here, but it goes in the right direction, I think. How is that for a provocation?
Okay, so for you, education is online education and MOOCs are not the problem, that are not the solution to educate masses and to reduce inequalities. And I'm also asking a question to Rachel.
I can answer that in the right one. It's like, well, it depends. It's again about this language question, but it depends on what you think about MOOCs, right? If you think about the 90s origin of MOOCs, which was wonderfully and open and peer-to-peer learning, or you think the monetized, financialized, corporatized version that was created through places like Coursera and others. Yeah, I do oppose that. I think it's a terrible idea.
Rachel, your thoughts on education and distributed one?
I don't think MOOCs are a terrible idea. I think they're in their infancy, but I share concerns over quality control, and I share concerns, and this is why I said, we've got to be really careful that we're not talking about the complete demise of institutions, because even models like Coursera, the universities provide a really important form of supply to the community. And so if the institution goes away completely and we go to a totally open online model, the quality and the development of thought leadership and academia and how that finds a new home, I think is a really interesting question. And so, you know, the physical institution as well, I mean, we feel it here today, like being together in person, interacting face to face has a really important role in society. So again, my interest is in this tension between the role of the institution and how it can actually feed quality in all dimensions of the word to the connected community. But what interests me about the MOOCs and other forms of connected communities is the reach and the democratization of the access. And that's where I think it's really difficult for me to say I don't believe in Coursera, because the democratization of the access around the learning, and not just with Coursera, I think examples like Stack Overflow are really interesting, and Khan Academy are really interesting. You know, Coursera isn't the answer, but a portfolio of learning communities where you can have very different learning experiences, where you can learn from a global community and then you can have a hyper-local, in-person experience at General Assembly. That's what interests me. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a question of complementarity between traditional ways of working and doing education and new ways who open access but don't solve any questions. Nicolas, you talked about the confrontation between the old world and the ancient world, the new world and the ancient world. Your report of fiscal law, fiscal digital law, which has been really remarked. One of the things that is at the center of your report is the free work, the question of free work and free and voluntary work, which is actually the personal data. That in the sharing economy question is very linked to the technology critics. For you, what are today the solutions, private and public, to accompany this transition and to take the best of the sharing economy and the access Rachel was talking about, without bearing the consequences, which could be like horrible, like Trevor has shown it?
Well, if you go back to Mechanical Turk and other examples resembling Mechanical Turk, it's obvious part of the value created by technology is its ability to divide work into micro tasks that can be accomplished by individuals on their spare time, which means that and this division reduce the value created at the individual level to the point that it can be so small, it's not worth paying you for that because it's too small. What we did in the report about taxation in the digital economy was we tried to, actually I prepared the lists of all the terms that you saw on the screens before for that purpose, to explain that it's really how it works, except we don't have a term to explain it to politicians. So we forged the term free work to provoke, to make sure that they will, to have their attention. It's basically the French people are working for those big, giant American companies, creating value for them, seeing the value in their profits, and they don't pay, and not only they don't pay us for this work, but they don't pay the taxes on their benefits. So the idea is the task can be so small that it's not worth paying the individual. But at scale, millions of people working together creates value that could generate tax revenue and help pay for social insurance or public services or basic infrastructures that help people connect and spare their time to be online and to generate data that is and data is only a proxy to reveals the work that's done by everyone while using Google search or Facebook or browsing products on Amazon and so on and so on. Basically, the problem is not only are we're not paid for this, but there's no taxes paid based on it. So we don't get the value in any way, nor through the form of personal income, neither under the form of public spending, basically.
Yeah. What you're saying in the end of your report is that basically all the solutions are quite tricky because we need some collaboration between not only like inside the public institutions, but also with all the countries, because technology is so distributed that you couldn't just see the value, and the restructuring of the value chain had to be accompanied by a new sort of governance that implicates more just one country. So it's getting a little bit political here. So and a question also of power. And Trevor, you wanted to react, I think.
Yeah, I do, because I think I completely agree with you. I think it's all really amazing observation, and I loved the French tax proposal. I think they got very worried about this. I think there was an immediate meeting between Google and the French government following that. But I just wanted to think that maybe this argument that also Michael Bowens and others made, that there is no value generated because it is so minute, has actually also changed in the last 1 or 2 years, where now Facebook's revenue has tripled in the last quarter through advertising, which would be directly related to the user. And Google reports that it makes between $600 and $500 per user per year, between $600 and $500 per year. That's significant even if you just look at the single user. And also, like you mentioned, the basic income, which is also one of the responses that I would suggest. There's some hope there as well, with Switzerland bravely leading the task.
Well, I have something to say about basic income. It's a solution put forward by a lot of people, observing that it's harder and harder to pay us for the work, for the value we create while clicking and writing online and using the applications online. And one of the solutions put forward is basic income. So if we can't pay you, at least the state can pay you a basic income. There's a need not to forget that basic income basically already exists under the form of powerful tools that are social insurance. Well, in France, it's called Sécurité sociale. In the US, it's Social Security and Medicare and the new Obamacare system. Basically, it's providing income when the people need it the most, when they're sick, when they're old, when they have little children, small children. So it works, basically. And maybe before working on a new system that would be the basic incomes, we have to make sure that all the systems that work for decades, for centuries, in some cases, should be funded. But it can't be funded if all the value escapes the territory and ends up in the accounts of foreign corporations located in tax havens.
Rachel, what do you think about revenue, basic income? Do you think it would be a good solution to the discrepancy between value production and employment?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to get beyond the conversation of micro labor and really talk about micro entrepreneurship. I mean, one of the things that excites me the most about this economy, and when you actually spend time with the users, is they often talk about how it's one of the easiest ways to become an entrepreneur. I don't mean starting a business, I mean being a host, being a driver. And what they say is that when they have a taste of entrepreneurship, it's not about then becoming a rabbit or becoming a host. It's often, I know it can sound evangelical because you're shaking your head and I haven't even finished, but they do say like their lens on the world changes. Like they realize that they do have assets that they can make money from, but also be connected to communities in a really different way. And I think there's one or two groups that rarely get talked about in the conversation that are extremely important, and that's the elderly, and that's stay-at-home mums or parents. So groups that are often isolated or undervalued in society, this economy has huge potential, not just in terms of monetary value creation, but actually reconnecting them to neighborhoods and social structures where they were previously isolated. And so it's not necessarily about the direct value they get from that one exchange. What they often say is they feel a reconnection that then shifts their behavior or shifts their interaction with their community.
But Sarah, like, I don't want to, push this too far, but like, I mean, isn't this just the neoliberal idea of self-entrepreneurship that should be totally rejected? I mean, like, this basically where we all say, like, we are just all entrepreneurs now, and we are just all in it for ourselves, against and with others, whatever. Take TaskRabbit, right? So TaskRabbit, like, works, just fine for a young, energetic person that sort of goes out every day and goes from task to task. But it also assumes that you never get sick. It also assumes that you never get old. It also assumes that you're basically just like on the run all day, and you can do this perpetually without health insurance. This is just a total affront to all the labor struggles that people have fought for hundreds of years, like for the 8-hour workday, for health insurance. It's all wiped out by this stuff, I mean, so I'm sorry, I can't share this at all.
But no one.
This is the reason why developing entrepreneurship should go along with developing social insurance, empowering social insurance. You can have a more entrepreneurial society if you don't have more powerful and better funded social insurances. That's one of the findings of the launch of Obamacare in the US. It's that people suddenly, because they're covered, are quitting their job to create their own company because they don't fear ending up without health coverage anymore. So
what you described in terms of this sort of wonderful, I mean, at least for the United States, what you described in terms of benefits really doesn't exist. Sure, there's social insurance, there's Obamacare, but Obamacare really only kicks in if you get really, really sick. You pay a fortune for the everyday stuff. People are everything but protected. Everything but protected.
But it works better here in France.
Rachel?
Well, France is, of course, a better society.
I feel like we've gone into one direction of labor, but just to respond to a couple of things that you said, I mean, I would argue there are many companies that exploit their employees and do not take care of them in far worse ways than you see. When you know the founders of these companies, they haven't figured it out, but it's very much top of mind. Like, how do they develop a new benefit structure? What's their role around liability? It's not like they're devoiding themselves of responsibility. Whereas if you speak to many big corporates with factories, and they are trying to devoid the responsibility. So again, I think we have to keep reminding ourselves this is really a baby. It's 4 to 5 years old, and we're expecting all these answers before we've even tried it. So, but the second thing I'd say is, you don't meet many people who quit their whole life to become, super sharers. And that may change. It's often an addition, an enhancement, a supplement. It's often underemployed people, unemployed people that don't have choices. And what you hear is that this is a way back in for so many different people. And that is really important, because when you speak to people who've been unemployed for 2 years, or when you speak to an elderly person that no one's spoken to in a month, or a stay-at-home mum that can't figure out how to go back to work, just being engaged again in society, the money's almost irrelevant to them.
Maybe because also they took this opportunity because there aren't many other responsibilities. We couldn't maybe put inequalities, rising inequality that Piketty has very well shown in his last book on only showing economy. It's only maybe a symptom, all that. What do you think, David? Do you think that we could put all this, all the responsibility of the sharing economy on the collaboration, or maybe other factors? And should we also? What is the community the better equipped tomorrow to not have these consequences and to fight against them?
Well, it's not so easy to answer your question, but what I would say that we need to be alert and to be open to experimentations. And I think the debate here reveals that things are not black or white, and probably we find it difficult to find our way in this new reality. And probably one thing that would help us is to be open to experiments. But at the same time, it's what's difficult with this posture is that once the experiments are are led, probably it's likely that someone holds a position which is after very difficult to criticize or to nuance. So it's not, I don't have a final answer, unfortunately, but I would say that we could, let's say, navigate between foster experimentations and be transparent on those experimentations and to, for them to be open to reverse actions and not to open, let's say, final positions for players that would gain a definitive position on a topic or on a vertical.
Thank you very much. The time's up. Thank you very much for your participation. And I give the microphone to the next MC.